This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast today is Mitch Steele, who wrote the book on IPA, literally. Welcome to the podcast, Mitch.
Thanks, Jamie.
Mitch is the former brewmaster for Stone and now the founding brewmaster for New Realm Brewing in Atlanta, Georgia. And we're going to talk about some really fun, cool stuff, certainly hops related, all about making IPAs of a whole variety of sorts. And I think we might even get into talking about some hard seltzer, too, a pretty hot topic among craft brewers right now.
Sure is, yes.
But first, before we get started, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and dedication to their customers' craft. G&D is committed to cold, whether you operate a brew pub or large-scale production brewery. Contact G&D Chillers today at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Mention this podcast and receive up to $1,000 worth of glycol with the purchase of any new G&D chiller. Also, turn your fridge into the best craft beer bar around with the Tavour app. Get access to hard-to-find 100% independent craft beers from 47 states. Only buy the beers you want and skip the ones you don't. Ship any amount of your hand-picked beer to your doorstep for one flat fee. Yep, any amount. Download the free Tavour app today and get $10 in beer money with code BREWING. So, Mitch, normally we start off the podcast with a little bit of a historical arc, but I'm pretty sure everybody knows your historical arc on this one. A long tenure, writing the book for Stone IPAs, General Stone Beers, leading the brewing operations there. And then you decided to embark on a new venture with New Realm, move across the country from Southern California to Atlanta. Talk to me a little bit about that kind of choice and, the excitement of getting into a new project and being able to build it from the ground up.
Yeah, I mean, that was really the motivating factor for doing it. I'd been at Stone for 10 years and it was great and a great run. And I think, when I told Steve and Greg that I was going to do this, they understood. They were disappointed, but they understood. And, being entrepreneurial themselves, obviously. So, it was just an opportunity to try something new and maybe brew some different beers and just build something from the ground up, and see if we could make it work.
So, you came into Stone and they had a house philosophy towards the beer they make and their consumer expectations, and you brewed to that, but you were able to, kind of find ways to move in subtle directions out of that. How then, coming into a brewery like New Realm, do you envision something different and apart from that? And what, this kind of idea and a house approach and point of view, that you're going to then build for a new brewery?
Yeah, I think I keep a lot of that philosophy from Stone because I enjoyed that. I mean, sure. I love Stone beers before I joined them. That idea of just brewing aggressively flavored beers where there's no mistaking what you've put into the beer, I think is really cool. And we kind of follow that for a lot of our beers. But I'm also, pretty respectful of classic styles as well. Right. And the fact that our restaurants in Atlanta, the people that come into our restaurants like these beers allows me to brew things like Pilsners and Märzens and Hefeweizens and some German traditional beers, which is really cool for me as a brewer because I've never really been able to do that.
Stone has restaurants. You can't brew that for them too.
Yeah, that wasn't what Greg wanted us to do. Sure. And I remember, when we'd have conversations about new beers, and if I ever said anything related to a classic style, he'd just break out into this big yawn. And so I kind of just, doing things like a Scotch ale or something like that, I just dropped the idea pretty quick, which was fine because I loved what we brewed at Stone and I had a lot of fun doing it. But, I appreciate the ability to do some other things now too.
So how do you still build a continuity, amongst the beers that you make for a new brewery like New Realm so that, consumers understand what those flavors taste like even across some of these various styles? Or is that just a reflection of your own personal, approach to these things?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I think, we're still trying to kind of establish our identity as a brewer. And what I say right now, when people come into our restaurant, I want every beer drinker that comes into our restaurant to find something that they would enjoy, so I don't want to pigeonhole myself into different things, or one thing rather. And so, our approach has been, when we brew something, we want to brew it really well. And if it's a classic style, we want to nail it to the classic style. And if it's something more innovative, then we want to have a flavor combination that works exceptionally well. And so, I just want people to have a lot of variety when they come into our place. Now, we're not distributing that many beers. Those are a little bit more, IPA focused, what we send out into distribution. But, we do have our Pilsner, and it's a hoppy Pilsner.
Okay.
It's hoppier than a lot of them. And so we can, I've always I've made a lot of effort to be able to brew a lot of different things, and that's what we try to do.
Let's talk. I'm going to keep pushing on this because I'm just curious about it. When you talk about brewing a classic style, but it's nailing a classic style isn't nailing the Platonic ideal of this one thing. There are multiple expressions that all feed into an idea of a classic style. For you, when you're approaching, say, something like hoppy Pilsner, what is it about that kind of idea of a classic, that appeals to you? And then as you look at it, how do you make some of those decisions about, which hops we're going to select, what kind of base malt we're going to, build on this, what kind of brew house process we're going to build around this. So, to kind of, build a body, how much malt character do we want into it? Are we looking for a little bit of softness and sweetness? Are we building it hard and sharp? Talk to me a little bit about some of that vision process for you.
Yeah. And actually the Pilsner is a good one to talk about with relating to that, because that was one where we really did get our heads together and try to figure out what we wanted to do. So when we did our Pilsner, I wanted to do kind of a North German Pils. I wanted to have something that had a little bit of bitterness to it. But the big thing I was shooting for with that beer was to have hop aromatics in it. And we went, the water in Atlanta is very soft, so that's a good starting point for brewing a Pilsner. We decided to go 100% German malts on it. We trialed a couple of different Pilsner malts and settled on one.
What do you use?
We use Weyermann Pilsner.
Okay.
And that's the only malt that's in the beer except for a little bit of acidulated malt.
Okay.
And it just works great. And then we, on the brew house side, we don't do decoction or anything like that, and I don't really think it's necessary to brew a great beer. I appreciate the fact that people do it and
right.
really think that they get a lot out of it. But I just, from a production standpoint, it's a nightmare. So, we didn't want to go down that road. So we do a step infusion mash on it, with a low temperature, high temperature, and then a mash off temperature. And we get what we want from that, with the malt flavor and everything coming through. The hopping is where I kind of took a little bit of a left turn, and so we start off the brew using traditional German hops, but then in the whirlpool process, we dose it heavily with a traditional hop. We're using Hallertau Hersbrucker, which is Hersbrucker is one of my favorite German hops.
Yeah,
and we're combining.
Why is it a favorite?
I just think it's really clean and floral, and just kind of got that classic German character to it. Hallertau is awesome as well, but we decided to use Hersbrucker in this just because I did some dry hop trials with it at Stone, and just fell in love with it. But we also use Huell melon hops in the beer as well.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's a blend of those two hops in the finish. And I think what was going through my head at the time was kind of blending the tradition with the new, and trying to get the best of both worlds, with that beer. And it's been consistently one of our top sellers. So originally when it first came out, it was way too bitter.
Okay.
And people laughed at me because I'm, an IPA guy, and they're like, "What are you trying to do? Brew a bitter Pilsner, an IPA Pilsner?" So we've made adjustments from there,
Yeah.
and it still runs 35 to 40 IBUs though. It's still pretty bracingly bitter. But I like that. I like dry and bitter. I just like that kind of combination in a beer. It's I don't like sweet beers in general, so having a nice crisp beer that's got some bitterness and has a lot of hop aroma was something that we were trying to do with this beer.
Sure. What does the hop schedule look like on that? And I imagine your whole melon is coming in. Is that only a dry hop then?
No, it's a whirlpool hop.
Okay.
We're using kind of a hop salad on this one, but we bitter it with Magnum. It's fairly traditional until we get to the whirlpool, and then we do a late kettle edition that's got Saphir and Sterling, which is the only American hop in the mix.
Yeah.
But Sterling is designed to be a Czech Saaz type of hop. So, it's got some of that Saaz character to it, which is really nice. And then, so that's in the late edition. And then we do the whirlpool edition with the Huell melon and the Herzbrecher.
Okay. And is there a dry hop component to it too? Or?
No,
Okay.
we don't dry hop it. We thought about doing so, but we liked how the hop character was when it first came out. So we just, we've done dry hop Pilsners. We just don't do it with this one.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's since we're talking about hops, let's switch gears a little bit and start talking about IPA formulation. But before we get into that, this episode is brought to you by Brew Guru, the free mobile app that alerts you to local discounts on beer, food, and homebrewing supplies. Created by the American Homebrewers Association, Brew Guru is your essential guide to brewing and drinking great beer. Start a 30-day free trial, no credit card info required when you download Brew Guru for iPhone or Android. Balancing barley and hops is your expertise, and for Clarion Lubricants, food-grade lubricants is theirs. The team at Clarion knows that when it comes to making great beer, you're the expert, and when it comes to supplying food-grade lubricants backed by service-oriented professionals, they're the experts. Clarion will work with you to create an efficient lubrication program that helps protect your brewery. To speak with an expert, dial 1-855-MY-CLARION, that's 855-692-5274, or visit clarionlubricants.com. Clarion Lubricants, the experts that experts trust. So IPAs, we now talked about how you envision a Pilsner, but this has to be one of the most anticipated things for you to start brewing at this new brewery coming out of someone who literally did write the book on IPA and had built such a iconic idea of West Coast IPA at Stone. Talk to me a little bit about how you started envisioning IPAs and some of that process, knowing that your new market in Georgia may not have some of the kind of bitter embrace of West Coast hop fanatics, or and have a broad maybe certainly not as saturated of a heavy IPA market as San Diego County is. How do you bring this IPA style to an audience like this? And I'm not saying that Georgia doesn't know IPAs. IPAs are everywhere. But different regions have different tastes. And how did you talk to me about that process of envisioning and designing? Well,
it's actually very interesting because we goofed. When we started off, we did a West Coast IPA that was very much inspired by Stone IPA. I kind of took that as a template and then built upon that. And it's 73 IBUs, and it's dry hopped with Centennial and Simcoe, which are two of my favorite hop varieties. And that's a combination I never used at Stone, so I felt okay about using it. And we just wanted to brew a really great IPA. And the first few months of customers coming into our restaurant, the feedback we got is the beer was too bitter for them, and they didn't really like it. And so and it's still on, and the people that are really IPA fanatics and IPA fans love the beer.
Yeah.
But it's not the big seller that we thought it might be.
Right.
And so we brewed another one, and this is kind of what I do. It's like, okay, let's make something else, and we did something that was a little bit lower in IBUs. It's 55 or so. It's a little lower in alcohol, and then it's dry hopped with a combination of Mosaic, Citra, Azaka, and Laurel, and that is Hoptropolis IPA. And we were going for kind of a tropical type flavor because that is popular in Atlanta.
Sure.
The IPAs that have that, the mango and the citrus components to them, and less of the piney, resiny components, which is what Hoplandia has. And so we did Hoptropolis, and that's been a great seller for us. And, it's not as bracingly bitter as Hoplandia.
Right.
But, again, it's kind of like brewing something for everybody. And we brew a lot of different IPAs. And, we started off, we did a black IPA because there was a restaurant in Georgia that told us they'd put it on tap if we did it. So we did it. When we started, we needed to learn our brew house and our fermenters and how everything works. So I brewed things I was familiar with, but as we got into it, then we started brewing a lot of different things. And we started brewing hazy IPAs about 4 months in. And we've got one now that's called Hazy Like a Fox. And I had to learn how to brew them. I mean, they're brewed radically different.
And I know everyone likes to point out, Mitch, was a little skeptical of hazy IPAs early on, and then and found the gospel on that. Talk to me a little bit about your process, and not only like wrapping your head around it, but coming to a point realizing what the potential was there, not just commercial potential, but also the brewing potential.
Yeah, it was really fascinating, and as a brewer, and I think most brewers kind of fall into this as well. We like to learn how to do new things, and we like to be challenged. And this was definitely a challenge because the people that are really successful at brewing hazy IPAs don't really share a lot about how they're doing it. And so I was asking...
Unless you read Craft Beer Brewing Magazine, in which they absolutely do.
That's good to know. So, I asked a lot of questions, and I talked to a lot of people about what they're doing. And one thing I found is a lot of people are doing it different ways, and there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat. But it was fascinating to me from the standpoint that these are so different than a West Coast IPA. The grist is different. The water chemistry is different. A lot of brewers are using lactose sugar in there, so they're going completely polar opposite of the dry IPA that is West Coast IPA. And trying to figure out how to do that and make a beer taste good was really hard. And I remember the hardest thing we had, once we got the flavor component and understood what was happening during the mid-fermentation dry hop and the development of the juiciness, was getting stable haze.
Sure.
I mean, every brewer who's gone through any sort of professional training is taught how to make beer clear, and nobody teaches you how to make a beer hazy. That's just not done. So, this is going against everything you've learned as a brewer.
Sure, and making a beer clear is actually a little bit easier than it is making a stable hazy beer. I mean, using findings and other techniques, you can clear just about any beer. But making sure that haze stays in solution, those hop polyphenols stay in solution, that your protein particles are small enough to kind of remain in solution. I mean, that is its own challenge. It's one we talk about pretty often here.
Yeah, it was hard for us, and we.
How'd you do it?
Well, so number one, yeast selection is important.
Yeah.
So you got to have a yeast that works well with this style and doesn't settle out too hard. Because I know, I've had some hazy IPAs from a can where the yeast there's still yeast in it, and it's
right.
But in the end, we actually centrifuge our yeast out and leave the haze in, and we have a centrifuge in our brewery, so. A lot of the top brewers do, Other Half and Trillium. I mean, they're all, even, Treehouse, all of the guys brewing big hazy IPAs are centrifuging those beers for that same kind of reason, because centrifuging it will create that more stability in the long run. Yeah, and that's what we found out too, because we tried the first couple of times we tried brewing them, we tried just racking into a bright tank, and then and we just didn't like what the yeast was doing in that situation. So
what yeast are you using?
We're using London Ale 3 for Hazy Like a Fox.
Yeah.
Kind of the one of the 2 or 3 hops that a lot of brewers are using.
Yeah.
And we found we like that hop a lot, that yeast a lot, sorry. And it ferments well, it produces good fermentation flavors, and it biotransforms hop components well. It
seems to work decently well, even in a large production environment.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a little surprising because it can be early on. It was kind of finicky, and generation issues that brewers were having, where 5 generations in, it just wasn't actually remaining stable anymore. But even large breweries, I mean, I know that New Belgium is brewing 2,000 barrel tanks full of London Ale 3. It's even working at this kind of very large production scale, as well as on this very small and hip scale. So how do you get good results out of that London Ale 3 then?
Well, I mean, we just treat it like all of our other yeast, basically. I mean, we don't repitch it, because we go through the fermentation dry hop, and the yeast coming back has got all the hop components on it, and it's just really, it's not very healthy. So we've been struggling with that a little bit. Having to buy new yeast.
Buying new pitches, or you're not propping them up?
We've just started propping them up. We don't really have the equipment to do proper propagations, but we're able to buy a 10 barrel pitch and build it, and and then just go with it. The fermentation temperature, we played around with a couple, and we kind of settled on about 68 degrees. And, to get the haze, we use the oats and the wheat and everything in the brew house, and do 2 dry hops in the beer, and so it works.
How much oats and yeast, and you use the standard 2-row as the base of that, or
that is standard American 2-row as the base malt, and I think we're 30 to 40% combination of wheat and oats in the beer.
So that's pretty significant.
Yeah. Maybe it's about 30. And that's it. Yeah. And it seems to throw a lot of haze. But our big problem was figuring out how to run the centrifuge and leave enough haze in the beer. And we were able to do some workarounds with the centrifuge bowl speeds to make that work. But we're running it at a much different bowl speed than any other beer we centrifuge. So it's a different process.
Are you mashing in a particular way to kind of help stabilize that haze? Keep those proteins in the right place?
Yeah, we're not really. I mean, we're just kind of doing a normal step infusion on that, but we're not doing any sort of weird temperature rests or anything like that. Not weird's probably not the right word, but
sure.
But
nothing too crazy.
We're not going too crazy.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about thinking about hops in these kinds of, in this hazy IPA.
So,
I mean, this is what everyone expects from you. You're the master, right?
And I'm still learning on this whole thing, because what you're trying to get out of the hops is completely different than what I did for years.
Yeah.
But I've read a lot of stuff about having hops with high geraniol and getting that to biotransform to the citronellol and things like that. And we tried a bunch of different hop combinations. We tried the Mosaic and the Galaxy thing that a lot of the successful hazy IPA brewers are using. But we ended up settling on Azacca and El Dorado. And it's about a 50-50 blend, and we add that during the fermentation, and I think it just goes 100% orange juice within 2 days, which is really cool. And then after fermentation, we dry hop it with those 2 hops again, and Azacca is very pineapple-y, and El Dorado is very lemony. So, getting those flavors out of the hops as well. So we think that's important. I know there's a lot of brewers that are making these that aren't doing the fermentation dry hop anymore, and there's brewers that use the cold whirlpool editions, which we have just started to play with, and the idea being that you're getting all the oils into the fermenter, and then you can still get the biotransformation process going. So it's been fascinating, and I'm not a hater. I never was a hater of hazy IPAs.
Sure.
I was skeptical that they were going to stick around.
Yeah.
And I will admit, I was surprised at how popular they became. That surprised me. But from a brewing standpoint, they're fun to brew, and they're a challenge to brew, and so I always appreciated that part of it.
It's always an interesting one for me to hear someone, and I hear it pretty frequently, say, I didn't like IPAs, and then I had a hazy IPA, and I all of a sudden now I like IPAs. And, that is kind of a cool thing for people to find their entry into this, whether Yeah, and I'll put aside any debates as is it actually an IPA, because these are just words we use that have common meanings that we all decide together that they mean something, like the phrase black IPA, does it really mean anything? It doesn't mean anything other than what we decide that it all means collectively. And we push that out there. So, is hazy IPA, I mean, nothing's objectively an IPA other than, again, what we all agree that it is. But for that sense, the idea of IPA has lots of hops in it. It seems to be that kind of shorthand for it, and it does. It's right there. But those kinds of bright and fruit forward flavors, I mean, they're pleasant to human beings. We are, naturally conditioned to like those things. It's not a huge surprise.
No, and I think more people like sweet than they like to let on. These beers are fuller bodied; they have a little more sweetness, and I think that appeals to a lot of people, even though they may not admit it.
Thousands of years of evolution have put us to this point where, yes, we like sweet.
Yeah. Right. And so, I going back to your point about whether it's an IPA or not, I actually suggested that maybe it should be called something different. I was trying to pay the beer style a compliment.
Sure.
But I got I put that out on Facebook and got completely skewered by it. And I'm like, okay, you guys missed my point here. I'm not denigrating these beers. I think they're fascinating and I think they're tasty, but they're so polar opposite of how to brew a West Coast IPA or an English IPA that maybe they deserve their own name. And and people didn't like that at all.
I'm pretty sure I argued with you on Facebook about that one too. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you in some ways, are these IPAs that much different than English IPAs?
Yeah, I actually think English IPAs are very similar to West Coast IPAs.
All right.
When I was researching the book and everything, and I'm not talking about contemporary English IPAs, but the historical ones were fermented to be brewed to be very light in color, fermented to be incredibly dry. And they were hopped at the same rates that people are hopping American IPAs. So
interesting.
So that, but then when you look at hazy IPAs,
in terms of just amounts or in terms of actual, volume to alpha acid,
no amounts of hops. Okay. So you're, back in the 1800s,
they certainly weren't in the hops bitterness race that we are now.
No, not even close. But most people think that the beers were probably 50 to 60 IBUs. And that's based on just what we think we know about East Kent Golding's hops back in the 1800s,
right.
Probably 3 to 5% alpha acids and that kind of thing. But, when you look at a hazy IPA, you want color, you want body, you want lack of clarity, right? And, the English brewers in the 1800s would settle their beer in casks for up to a year just to make sure that it was crystal clear before they shipped it to India, because otherwise it would ferment in the barrel and explode on the boat. So, so I was like, wow, this is really radically different than how I've learned how to brew IPAs. And I was impressed by it. I'm like, how do brewers go in this direction and take it this far out of that box, that IPA box, and make a beer that tastes this good? And so I was, when I suggested that maybe it should be its own style, it was because I thought they were very different, brewed very differently. And the taste is different too. I mean, they're sweeter, they're fuller, they're softer. The hop character is different in some ways. And, but I mean, I wasn't trying to say anything bad about hazy IPAs. I was trying to recognize that they're really kind of a creative thing and incredible innovation there.
But in the market today, IPA is 40% of the craft beer market. I mean, you put that acronym on something and people want to buy it just because it is what it is.
And when I said that, I was not wearing my marketing hat. I was wearing my brewing hat, and I get it. I get why people were upset with that.
It's it's the same thing with fruited Berliner Weisses and Gozas and whatnot. Give American brewers a little bit of rope, and they'll run with it and create their own thing, and and it's fun to see. I mean, that's what the history of brewing. It's what the history of brewing has been marked by.
Yeah, I mean, the history of craft beer is all about innovation and change, and doing things and taking what's been established and then twisting it and building on it, and that's what's made this business so cool and so successful. If you go back even in the early 80s, people were taking English styles but using American hops in them and creating these beers that were new styles. And so the people that, I know several hazy IPA haters out there, brewing colleagues, and And I'm like, I mean, there was a time when nobody wanted a West Coast IPA either, and nobody wanted to brew it, or nobody wanted to use this hop or whatever. And I just never looked at it that way. I was like, hey, if it's innovative, it's creative, and people want to drink it, why wouldn't I brew it?
That is a curious philosophy, a curious kind of mental place that you bring up there, that folks into, people that have built craft beer businesses on the idea that people should, that drinkers should try more interesting, more flavorful, better made beers, then might get to a point where they then stop that development and that growth and want to keep things where it's comfortable for them rather than allowing things to move. I think that kind of effect happens in all sorts of cultural institutions, not just beer. It happens in food. It could happen in music, art, and other things as well. A certain generation gets to a certain point and they're happy and they're comfortable and they've got this thing and the business is working well and it's making money and customers are buying this and they want it to be this. But the march of time and creativity and new producers will always keep pushing things in some sort of new direction. It's the nature and restlessness of creativity.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's exactly what's happening. I know I think the biggest concern with the people that don't want to brew hazy IPAs is they're afraid that their other IPAs that they love are going to have to go away. And certainly that was a concern of ours. It's like, hey, if we brew hazy like a Fox, what's going to happen to Hoplandia and Hoptropolis? They're very different in flavor, so we still get people that really like those other two beers. So it's worked out well.
We're starting to see and I'm also hearing where brewers start to talk about how they are seeing a little bit of a return to bitterness. That as much fun as these hazy IPAs are, inevitably everything is cyclical in the world of craft beer. Nothing is going to last forever, and that we can count on that from here until the end of time. Hopefully, some things do continue to persist in relatively stable ways. Those things that we like, but at the same time, trends are going to come and trends are going to go, and the trends can be very good and positive for craft beer. But bitterness seems, and some of this kind of West Coast IPA, this almost re-envisioned kind of West Coast IPA seems to be making a little bit of an upswing right now.
Yeah, we're hearing a little chatter in that direction too. It's even at our booth here today at the Great American Beer Festival, the Hoplandia IPA is doing pretty well. With the people that are trying it, and in some of the beer communities on social media, I'm seeing people asking, where can I get a West Coast IPA in Atlanta? And we've got one. So, I'll say, hey, you can try ours, if you want. But so I'm starting to see a little bit of that, and hazy IPAs aren't going anywhere. They're still going to be the main driver of things, I think, for several years. But, I'm a guy that likes variety. Right, I like brewing a variety. I like drinking a variety. I like being able to provide a variety of beers. So, I don't want to just be a hazy IPA brewer. I want to be able to brew other types of IPA. That's important to me.
So I think that's a good segue to kind of get back. We talked about Hoptropolis and Hoplandia, but we didn't really get into some of the details about how you build, put a little bit of a new school spin on these kinds of West Coast hoppy IPAs. One of the things I've noticed, and we talked to Evan, Price of Green Cheek about it a little, a couple weeks ago on the podcast, about that. Using some of the kind of more, fruit forward flavors and some of the, hopping techniques that hazy IPA brewers are using and pulling those back into the West Coast style, bringing some bitterness, upping some of the fruit character. And it does, and it has, even in some iconic IPAs like Cigar City, High Lie, and others, it's creating some really fantastic, still dry, not very sweet, and still bitter, but fruit forward, West Coast IPAs. And that also seems to be on the rise. So talk to me a little bit then about how you use hops in your West Coast style IPAs, but are using them in maybe a little bit different way than you have before.
Yeah, probably the Hoptropolis is the beer where we do that.
Sure.
The Hoplandia is pretty traditional. I mean, I basically hopped it like I did for years, and didn't really try to get too crazy with that because, I wanted to make sure I knew what was going to come out of our brew house, and it was something. But Hoptropolis, we definitely were trying to get that tropical, mango and peach and citrus kind of blend and pineapple kind of thing going. We just combined hops until we found a combination that we like. And I've always done that. I've always, I guess I have this reputation with my former, people that used to work for me about how I hop beers and how I always used a lot of different varieties.
Sure.
And there was a practical reason for that, because if the beer took off and we didn't have enough hops, we could adjust the recipe with other hops and not really change the flavor profile too much, versus doing a single hop, or 2 hops in the dry hop, and then you can't get one of them. You can't make the beer anymore. So with Hoptropolis, we tried to get kind of that really interesting flavor combination to try. We use Citra. We love Citra hops, and Citra. I think, they're the most popular hop right now. But I think, for me, what was kind of neat about that beer was throwing the Azacca in there and getting that pineapple from the Azacca. And I think that just combined really well with the Citra. And then we put some Mosaic in there to give it a little bit of dankness, and a little bit of that more of that tropical type of thing. And, it's a hop blend that really works. That beer, when it's fresh and I pour it, I get almost like like an old canned fruit cocktail kind of character. I'm getting that pineapple and peach and, a little bit of that cherry and, the whole, it was like going back in time, to when I was a kid and had to eat those little fruit cups, But that's what I got out of the beer. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. This is really different and I like it. I think the whole idea of using some of the techniques for hazy IPAs and other IPAs is great. We've been talking about doing that. We haven't done a lot of it yet, but we've been talking about doing, kind of a mid-fermentation dry hop on a more West Coast style.
Yeah.
And, it's on our list of things that we want to try. And the cold whirlpool hopping, I think, is something that has a lot of potential for us for, brewing all sorts of different types of IPAs, because then all the oils go into the fermenter. They're not lost in the stack.
Yeah.
So.
How do you find the perfect mix of those hops? I'm trying to break into the Mitch Steele hop brain. What is when you're smelling and rubbing hops and trying to figure out like, okay, rough building a percentage for a hops mix out of this kind of thing. What goes through your mind?
Oh, it's hard. You always wonder whether it's going to work or not. I think a lot of it is trial and error. And I'm a big believer in doing dry hop trials and just taking a beer and dry hopping it with several, doing several different, we just use homebrew, carboys.
Yeah.
And just dry hop, 5 gallons of beer with a certain hop. And then we go through a tasting and taste them and then kind of mix and match and play around with blending and things like that. And that gets us pretty close to where we want to go. And then we just tweak it from there. But, the hop combination for Hoptropolis, we tried. We said, we've got these hops. A lot of it is driven by what you have, right? We've got these hops. This would be a good home for them. Let's put them together and see how it works. And we liked the result. We did tone down the Mosaic a little bit after the first couple of batches because it was a little bit too Mosaic-y. Mosaic's a pretty dominant hop, and I wanted to get that Azacca pineapple and the Citra to really come out a little bit more. So we just made adjustments as we went. And fortunately with a restaurant and being able to brew 5-barrel batches, you can take those kind of risks and not have to have it right the first time. As long as it's still good, and then you tweak it. Yeah.
So you did a lot of piloting then on a smaller system before you kind of ramped it up to the big one.
Yeah, we have a 5-barrel pilot system, and we 6 fermenters on it, and we brew a lot there.
Yeah.
All of our brewers can brew on that if they want to. If they come up with a recipe, they build the recipe. But we do a lot of beer development there as well.
Yeah.
And trial and error, and we've been playing around with a lot of our beers. We'll try brewing them with a different malt on that system and just see if it's better or not, or if it changes it radically, or things like that. So we use it a lot for research.
Have there been any interesting finds that you found from some of those little pilot tests that you've done?
Oh boy, we used an American-made Pilsner malt in a Euphonia batch on that 5-barrel system, and I was incredibly impressed at how much Pilsner character was in that malt. Because I've had American Pilsner malts that are beautiful malts, but they're very clean, and they don't give you that kind of honey grassiness that you get from like a German Pilsner. that was really interesting, So
Okay.
now we didn't make it was a little bit different than what we had in Euphonia.
Sure.
So we didn't make a change there, but we've been using this Pilsner malt in other beers, and it's been fun, to kind of go through that discovery. Hop trials are always great,
Right.
We have a series of single hop beers or that we call Hop Audition, and tasting Sabro, tasting Strata for the first time.
Yeah.
That's always mind blowing. To get those new hop varieties and see what they're all about.
Use the same base kind of malt recipe
Yep.
and same yeast and just swap hops out on that.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
it's incredibly valuable. I mean, you learn so much from that.
Yeah.
And so we've done a lot of beers doing that. That's really where we get it. We got to do an experimental hop beer with John I. Haas, and that was cool, So we got 2 hops we'd never used before
Yeah.
and threw them in there and piloted them first and said, okay, we do like this combination, so
Yeah.
we're good to go.
The afternoon session of GABF just got out. It's right at time, so we can hear the cheering crowds behind us off in the background. Let's again switch a little bit of gears. I know that the subject of hard seltzer, is something that's been on your mind and that you've been putting some work into figuring out. Talk to me a little bit about, number one, what that market looks like for you as a craft brewery, why you want to get into that, and number two, what you found in terms of, kind of technical process, how you adapt a, production brew house, that's built for making beer into, building, creating this kind of, hard seltzer product. And then, how you think about making hard seltzers that are, that have some sort of distinct character and aren't just the same thing that everyone else is putting out, but more expensive.
Yeah, it's, and the first question, we're still not sure we want to do it. It's a very deep philosophical discussion. Do we want to be a brewer, or do we want to make a product that people want to drink? Because what you see what going on with White Claw and Truly and all this stuff, that's all the young people are drinking. I mean, we have. The 3 of us that started this company all have college-age kids.
Yeah.
And they don't see beer at parties anymore. They see hard seltzers. So
Interesting.
yeah, and it's like, okay, so what do we do? Do we change with the times and embrace this? Do we say we're a brewery and not do it? And we're still having those discussions.
Yeah.
But in the interim, while we're trying to figure out whether that's an avenue we want to go down, I've been trying to learn how to do them because I want to be ready in case we want to pull the trigger on it. And so we've brewed some pilot batches and have played around with different things and served them in our restaurants, and they've gone over pretty well. I think what I've learned, apart from the actual brewing process, is the flavor selection, because all these seltzers have a natural flavor added after fermentation in the bright kind of thing. And that's one thing we've learned. They're not adding real fruit or anything like that. They're adding a really concentrated flavor compound. And what you select for that is critically important. If you bring in trials of, samples of raspberry flavor from a bunch of different flavor houses, they're all going to taste very different. And so I think that's once you get past the process part of brewing these things, that's the real challenge to being successful with it. And, we're talking about, do we go with a black cherry seltzer because that's what's White Claw's biggest seller is the black cherry. Should we make one of those, or should we try to do something different? We don't have the answer to that yet, but those are the kind of questions we're asking ourselves. The process is somewhat fascinating, and what we've learned is most everybody does it the same way. They're taking some sort of sugar, mixing it with water in their brew house, boiling it or heating it to pasteurize it. And actually somebody who has a lot of experience with seltzer told us not to boil it. He said, don't boil it because you're going to develop some color from the sugar if you boil it.
Right.
And you don't want that. So he said, he told me just heat it up to like 165 degrees and hold it for 15 minutes, and that's going to pasteurize it and kill anything. So that was something we just learned recently. But then you take this liquid that's got this sugar dissolved in it, and you send it to a fermenter, you oxygenate it, and you add yeast nutrient to it. And because there's no nutrients in sugar, so you have to add yeast nutrients, and there's a lot of different ones out there. And then the yeast selection is really important too. The first one we did we fermented with our house ale yeast, and it had a definite sourdough type yeast character.
Sure.
And so we started using the distiller's yeast that's out there that a lot of people are using for seltzers, and that works really well. It's a lot cleaner in the end than the Cal Ale yeast was for us. And we're getting ready to try champagne yeast as well, because there are some champagne yeast strains that a lot of people have had success with doing this. So, and then you still get a little bit of color in it. And I'm not sure exactly where that's coming from. If you're running it in your brew house, you may be picking up from residual past brews. Boiling creates some color. So we've started finding our seltzers with carbon, granulated carbon.
Okay.
And that has cleaned them up significantly. It strips out any of that fermentation character, and it strips out color. So you end up with something that looks like a seltzer.
Right.
And that was a little tricky. The first seltzer we did had a pale yellow color. It was kind of like, okay, this doesn't look that great, so we use lemon in that. So it's lemon, so people expect it to be yellow maybe. But we figured that out. The sugar source is important. A lot of people are using cane sugar, and cane sugar, table sugar is sucrose, right? It's a combination of fructose and glucose in the molecules. So the yeast has to work a little harder to consume that sugar than using dextrose, for example. And dextrose is all glucose, and the yeast really likes that. And I had somebody tell me that using liquid glucose is the way to go. And you just pump it in. It mixes better than granular. And we haven't tried that yet, but we're looking at that. So it's been a learning process, and we've had fun with it. And I don't know if I'll ever drink what we make, but we're learning as we go. And like in the brewing community, people who are doing it have been very helpful, and I've been able to help a lot of people as well. With what we've learned and what we've tried and what we thought didn't work. Like using the ale yeast,
right?
And pass that on to people. So, it's kind of cool.
So then, using these flavors from flavor houses that are chemical compounds, obviously you're trying to, the same kind of color concerns. You want to, use these because they keep it clear and bright, and don't weigh it down. Meets those consumer expectations. Are there any concerns in terms of how you add and how you mix, and then keep some of these flavors, or are these just specifically designed, to remain in suspension in these kinds of drinks?
Yeah, you need to use water-soluble flavors, because otherwise they won't mix well. I think, as far as addition methods go, what we do is we just put some in the tank that we're sending the bright beer to, and then the turbulence created by pumping the bright beer, or the seltzer, I should say, into there mixes it up pretty well, and we've had success with that. Yeah, it's interesting. I did learn that a lot of citrus flavors will throw a haze, which you don't want. And there are flavor houses that are formulating these flavors that are haze free, so that's a good thing. There are a lot of flavor houses that have already had their flavors TTB approved. So when you have to put your formulation into the TTB, so they can allow you to brew this.
Right.
If you use one of those flavors, you're a step ahead of the game, which is really great.
Yeah.
So it's an evolving thing, but that's. We're still in very early stages of it. We've done 2 of them, so but we are gearing up to do more if we need to.
It's been absolutely fascinating to see how many we've been sent by craft breweries that are moving into this spectrum, and of course they run the gamut. Some are really great, and you can see why people enjoy drinking this. They're light, they're bright, they feel like they're not the heavy kind of beer approach. And then others taste kind of medicinal and fake, and there's something that's very unpleasant about that.
Yes.
And so it's still the Wild West when it comes to how to do these incredibly well.
Yeah, I think so. We tasted ours and we were like, the flavor's good, but it doesn't pack that punch that these commercial examples do. And again, philosophically, do we want to try and do what they're doing and having success with, or do we want to try and create our own niche with this? I don't know what the right answer is. We'll probably do a combination of both. Do something that people expect when they see a seltzer on the menu,
right?
And then maybe do something that's a little more exotic. That's kind of, I think, the path we're going to go down if we do this. But I'm just not sure yet.
Yeah. Have you tried back sweetening at all?
No, I haven't done that.
Okay.
I know there are some seltzers that are sweetened. I'm a little afraid of that because I don't want to have to add preservatives or go through pasteurization or any of that crap. I just don't want to do that. So we've been making ours all dry, and we'll see how those do. And then, if people need the sugar, we'll figure out a way to do it.
Makes sense. So, outside of seltzer, what's next on the horizon for New Realm? What are some of the brewing projects and some of the ideas percolating in your head that are making you excited about doing what you do these days?
Well, we're looking at. We've done a lot of kind of neat things. When brewed IPAs came out, we took that concept and we made several brewed IPAs, and then we took that and made a brute fruit ale with raspberries, and we were trying to make like a raspberry champagne kind of thing, because we can't serve champagne in our restaurant. That's Georgia law doesn't allow us to serve anything but our own beer. And so I said, all right, well, let's try to make something that's going to satisfy the people that want champagne, And so we did this raspberry brute ale that was dry as a bone and had this intense raspberry flavor, and it was all real fruit. It was puree.
Yeah.
And it had this bright pink color, and it was really cool. So those kind of things are what we do. We're working on a low-calorie, low-carb IPA. It's called Innocent
Isn't everybody,
IPA.
Mitch?
Yeah, right? I know. That's not that innovative at this
point. Is it
point.
100 calories or 110?
Ours are less than 100. That's the goal.
Less than 100.
Yeah,
all right.
Less than 100 and less than 5 grams of carbs. But, that evolved out of the brewed IPA process,
Sure,
right? I mean,
sure.
I'm sitting there tasting brewed IPAs, and I just said, wow, we've never run calories on this. We haven't run carbs. So we sent some out and ran them. We're like, oh, this is what we should be doing. And we've been talking about it for a long time. We brewed a couple of them, so
right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really a surprise. I mean, the whole glucoamylase thing came out of Miller Lite light beer,
right?
And so it's not a shock that we can produce low calorie beer that way, or lower calorie beer that way. When you're envisioning a low cal, healthier for you, slightly better for you IPA. That creates a whole bunch of new concerns. Certainly the idea of body in a beer that's that light becomes a whole nother thing. Talk to me a little bit about how you're designing that, and then also I know other brewers are experiencing the idea that different hops have different physical characteristics, especially in beers that are that light. How do you again think about hop selection so that you can use hops that may produce some more greater perception of body?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we've figured that out yet, to be honest. I think the way we've approached hopping these beers so far has been to use, the first one we tried using the kind of wine-like hops like everybody was doing, and then we moved away from that pretty quick.
Right.
We don't want it to taste like a hop tea. That's the concern. And we've got a batch going now where we use some Maris Otter malt in it, and use some oats in it to try and give it a little bit of extra smoothness, and then we add the enzyme as well. So that's going to be interesting to see how that turns out. It's a very difficult thing to do, and even back in the days when we started brewing session IPA at Stone, it was really hard to get something that had enough body to satisfy people, and
right.
And our first version of Go-To was very, very thin, and we added a little bit of dextrose malt to that, which is different than what you do for a low-cal beer. But, we ended up raising the alcohol in that beer because that's was the best thing. It started off at like 4.2%, and I think we took it up to 4.7%. Just because that little 0.5% of alcohol gave it a tremendous amount of body.
Just made the difference, huh?
Yeah. But yeah, with a brewed IPA, it's really hard, and I think that's been the knock on brewed IPAs over the last year or so that people have been doing them is that they don't have enough body and they're just too dry, And so using hops to get that perception of body, I don't know enough about that, but it's certainly something we've talked about, and
Right.
we just don't know which hops we should be doing. That's kind of one of those things that we're looking at and trying to understand.
Well, it's fun. It's fun to watch brewers try to crack the code on these
Yeah.
and create new products. Adam Avery, when he was on the podcast a few months ago, talked about their low-calorie hazy IPA. And I mean, it literally took him, 5 months to get from, those pilot batches that they had on tap there to what they're releasing now. And I think they're just releasing it today.
Oh, cool.
Or this week,
Okay.
JBF. These are... Again, even though the direction you want to move in, fine tuning and getting those points figured out can be a hard thing.
It is a hard thing. And, I remember having a conversation with somebody this week, and he goes, yeah, when was the last time you brewed a beer that was perfect the first time? And I'm like, that's a really good question, because it's almost never, I mean, I can count them on one hand, how many times we've nailed the beer on the first time and how excited you get when you do that, but you just got to go into it knowing you're going to have to do a lot of trial and error and try different things. And so, that's, again, that was how we were able to justify putting that 5-barrel brewery in our brewery in Atlanta side by side with a 20-barrel brew house. So, it just gives us the opportunity to really try a lot of different things and get things right before we go big.
So what else is next in beer? What's next, Mitch?
I don't know. Gosh, who knows?
Put
I
on
don't
your
think anybody
Nostradamus cap.
knows.
Yeah.
I can jump on the Pilsner bandwagon. Everybody says that's the next big thing.
It's been the big thing for 20 years
Yeah,
now.
right?
So, yeah.
I do take a lot
Brewers
of
love it for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
I love drinking them, of course.
Yeah,
But.
I'm happy that our Pilsner has been near the top of our sales since the day we released it. So that's been kind of cool. But I don't know, in Atlanta, every region's so different, and one thing we're finding now that we've got a brewery in Virginia is the people in Virginia are very different beer drinkers than the people in Atlanta.
Yeah,
and,
interesting.
In
what way?
Well, I think that people in Virginia like the tried and true stuff, you know. Our German lagers do incredibly well in our restaurant in Virginia Beach.
Yeah.
And, in Atlanta, I think Atlanta is a little bit more in tune with current trends, and what the cutting edge type stuff is, you know, and more exotic flavors and things like that, So we've had to kind of tailor our, what we brew.
And when you're saying that, you're not saying that every beer drinker is like this, but that the percentage of beer drinkers that are like this may be balanced in different ways,
That's exactly right.
It's, we're not, I know you're not trying to cast everyone that way. It's just, same kind of thing. Like when you go to Milwaukee, there's a greater percentage of beer drinkers that want these kinds of classic lager styles.
Yeah.
There's still those that want these, more progressive styles as well. It's just, the balance is a little bit different.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, and people are get more excited about fruited gozas in Atlanta than they do in Virginia, and that's okay, but people in Virginia like them too. It's just a little bit, the scales are a little bit different, the balance is a little bit different, but it's been interesting, from that standpoint. Next big thing with beer, I wish I knew. I just try to stay on top of things. If things start emerging that start getting some interest, I'm pretty quick to jump on them and brew them. We were the first brewer in Georgia to brew a brewed IPA, and brewed IPAs have come and gone. It was
a pretty quick one, right?
Yeah, but you got to try, and see what happens. And I don't know if seltzers are the next big thing.
Maybe they'll move the way the brewed IPAs have. We never know.
Yeah, I don't think so. Most of the industry experts are telling us seltzers are here for at least 3 to 4 years. They're going to be a big deal. So until a new generation of beer drinkers matures,
I love that that's it. It's like 3 to 4 years. That's the cycle now.
Yeah.
I've talked to some brewers who are like, if we have a brand that performs for 2 years, we're really happy with that.
Yeah.
The expectations now are not that we're going to build a brand that's going to keep selling for 20 years, because those are just almost impossible to make these days.
Yeah, it's really changed. Flagship beers are a thing of the past. You can have a flagship for a few years, but to think that it's going to last for decades is it's just not realistic anymore with the way the beer market is and the way people want to try different things, and they're very fickle, and there's not a lot of there's still a fair amount, but there's not that much brand loyalty like there was back, in the 80s or early 90s. And so you got to be quick, you got to be flexible, and you got to adapt. And, that's why the seltzer topic is important. Is this an example where you got to be quick and adapt to the changing drinking habits, or do you try to keep pushing what you do, and I don't know the answer, but it's interesting how the flagship concept has kind of gone away. And and I know at Stone, my last few years at Stone, we ended up reformulating a bunch of our beers and dropping a bunch of our beers just because they weren't selling anymore. And it's funny, we stopped brewing Sublimely Self-Righteous, which was our black IPA, and people were coming up to me very angry. And they're like, how could you discontinue that? And I said, believe me, I'm not happy about it, but when was the last time you bought one? And they're like, yeah, it's been about a year. Yeah. I'm like, that's exactly right. Why do we keep brewing something that people aren't buying?
There's your message. Beer fans out there, brewers, everyone else, if you want things to survive, buy them. Support them. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
If you want West Coast IPAs to stick around, buy them.
Yep. Basic business, right?
For sure. If you don't want seltzers to stick around, don't buy them.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Mitch, if people want to learn more about New Realm, where do they find you?
Well, so we have a website. It's newrealmbrewing.com that has a lot of stuff on it. We're very active on Instagram. We have 2 locations. One's in Atlanta. We're about a mile east of the downtown Midtown area, in a very heavily populated neighborhood, that's got a lot of nightlife and everything else. So we're kind of in the heart of...
Strategically positioned.
Yeah, really great. And then in Virginia Beach, we're about 5 miles from the beach strip, and all the hotels and stuff. We're in a more residential area, but, so it's a little bit more of a trek and a destination to go to our Virginia Beach spot than it is to go to Atlanta, where you can, thousands of people walk by our place every day. So, we get a lot of foot traffic there that we're never going to get in Virginia.
Whether you are in Virginia out there in the beach or whether you are in Atlanta, go by New Realm, grab a pint, grab a Euphonia Pilsner?
Euphonia
Pilsner, a Hopstropolis kind of new school West Coast IPA, or a Hazy Like a Fox. Hazy IPA.
Yeah, thank you.
And let Mitch know what you think of them. Mention this podcast and get $1,000 in free glycol from GD Chillers. Turn your fridge into the best beer bar around with the Tavor app. Download the Brew Guru app today, and Clarion Lubricants is the expert that experts trust. If you've enjoyed the podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click the subscribe button, subscribe to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, and support what we do. Thanks for sitting down with me on the podcast, Mitch. Really appreciated you talking today.
Thanks, Jamie. It was fun.
Cool. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.